So in this video, I'm going to entertain a philosophical exercise that doesn't build on the previous videos, but it is important because the ideas in this video combine with those ideas in the next video. So here we go. You have two basic choices to use as the foundation for your moral compass. Actions produce results. You can center your moral compass around actions, or you can center it around results. If you choose to center it around actions, then you have a verb-based moral compass. What this means is that you have established a set of principles, a code of conduct, if you will, that determines what actions are permissible, which ones may even be obligatory, and of course the rest would be forbidden. Now, in order for this code of conduct to have any meaning, you must extend it to all members of your society. That is, you establish a universal standard of behavior by which to hold all members of your society accountable. Now, if your focus is on actions, then you aren't so much concerned with the details of the results that emerge from these actions. In other words, you don't have a goal that you're trying to push your entire society into. Rather, you trust that as long as enough members of your society adhere to that code of conduct, then you would expect the sum total of individual actions in your society should lead you to a generally good place. This is the means justify the ends approach. Alternatively, you could center your moral compass directly on the results. This is a noun-based moral compass. So what does this mean? Unlike before, this time you do have a specific goal that you would like to guide society toward. Generally, this takes the form of identifying some objective that is necessary for society to function, right? If we don't have X, then society falls apart. We've got to have X. Well, if X itself is indeed necessary, then any action that is required to obtain X is also necessary, naturally, right? So if you're focused on the results, this is just like before, but kind of the opposite. If you're focused on the results, then this time you become a bit more flexible as to what actions are permissible to obtain X, right? If I want to get to Disneyland, then I don't care so much which road I took to get to Disneyland. All that matters is that I got to Disneyland. This is the ends justify the means approach. And one thing I want to clarify here is I don't believe that people are generally 100% sold on one idea or the other. I think most people with either mindset will tend to allow exceptions in more extreme cases. So, for example, on the action side, there's kind of a famous philosophical thought experiment, I didn't make it up, of the starving person in the woods. The idea is that you are starving alone in the woods and you are on the brink of death, but you happily stumble upon a log cabin and the owner isn't home, but you see some bread sitting on the windowsill. So the question is it morally permissible for you to take the bread and save your own life? Of course, according to strict adherence to the action code of ethics, that would be stealing, and therefore, no, you have to leave the bread and starve to death. But people generally allow an exception here because the benefit of saving your own life is way greater than the small cost of the loaf of bread. Especially if the you don't even have to break the window. You can just open it and take the bread. But what's interesting here is that that exception just so happens to be something that is necessary for the individual to survive. It's actually very similar to the example I just gave on the result side, right? If society needs X, you got to have X, then take the necessary action, right? It's the same kind of here on the individual level, right? On the flip side, there are exceptions on the results end of the spectrum as well, right? So someone might, in general, deem objective X to be necessary, but I wouldn't go that far. That action is way beyond the pale, right? So they would not say murder 100 million people to achieve their utopia. Well, not everyone stops at that line, but I don't want to get distracted. Let's stay on topic. So I came up with 3 bullet points on each side to try to justify each way of thinking. So this is how I want to expand on the topic a little more, and I'll start with the verb-based moral compass. So why should one adopt a moral compass based on actions? Well, the most practical argument for it is simply that by definition, actions are really the only thing you control. Right? So unless you are the sole actor in an environment that is entirely under your domain, you don't really control the results. Right? The results are actually a product of your actions, everyone else's actions, and whatever other constraints your environment operates under. So you don't really control this, right? You only control your own actions, right? So a morality of actions is trying to seed morality right at the start. Okay, so this approach is pragmatic and stays grounded in reality. The second bullet point is something I touched on earlier, which is that even though we don't try to control the results directly, we still generally expect them to come out reasonably well. And even if they don't, we can still say that we tried. Okay. And then the third bullet point, it has to do with the future. That is that the actions of today set the precedents for tomorrow. See, human beings are always looking around trying to see what other people are getting away with so they can try to get away with them in themselves, right? This happened in school, right? So it's kind of the 2-step process through codified law and then enforcement on the ground. But the goal is stability predicated on predictable human behavior, right? It's not just that I'm not allowed to attack you, but if I know that other people are punished for attacking me, then I can be more reasonably confident in operating in wider society, right? So that is kind of an outcome, if you will, but it's based on precedent of action. Now let's look at the flip side. Why should someone instead adopt a noun-based moral compass? Well, the most practical reason over here is that nouns actually exist. Things actually exist. Right? At the end of the day, an act is really just more of an abstraction. Someone waves their arms around and then it's over. It doesn't really matter after that. Whereas I can see a result. I can see a noun. I can smell a noun. I've never smelled a verb. Have you? No, you don't smell the act of a fart. You smell the result of it. Anyway, the second bullet point is that, well, I just touched on it. It's that actions are temporary, right? They are fleeting moments, right? So we did what we had to do because we had to get what we had to get, right? Don't worry about this whole precedent stuff, right? Every situation is different, right? Whatever comes up next, we'll improvise. Now, maybe all this sounds a bit facetious and probably a bit reckless, but what really ties it all together is this third bullet point. It's really important, and I've already mentioned it a couple times. This moral compass really kicks in when the targeted results are perceived to be necessary. right? If we have to get here, then we just do what we have to do, right? It's so it doesn't really matter. The verbs in that context just they kind of lose their significance at that point, right? Everything I just said up to this point in my defense here makes sense in that context. So to recap, the first bullet point was the most pragmatic argument on either side. On the action side, it was the fact that actions are what you can actually control, whereas on the results side, it was something that you could actually see. It was tangible, right? The second bullet point had to do how each side saw each other, right? So on the action side, it was able to justify why I couldn't be as concerned with the results because they would generally take care of themselves anyway. Whereas on the results side, it wasn't as concerned about the actions because they were temporary and they were necessary anyway, right? And then the third bullet point is the most interesting one because at the end of the day, and I'm going to have to expand a little more over here, but they both reveal that each moral compass is centered around the thing that it believes to be permanent, right? So I already expanded on this a little better on the action side because of how I described how actions set precedents for the future, right? So that's the thing that's continuous, right? As opposed to, it actually doesn't see the results as permanent, right? The results are ever changing, right? So even in the case you get bad results or whatever, you just keep going with your morals and eventually you should expect things to improve. So it's not as, part of the reason it's not as concerned with the results is that it sees them, no matter what they are, it sees the results as temporary, right? It's the actions that should always be worked on to be set as permanent precedents to continually, stabilize, but also perhaps continually improve. Now, on the other side over here, I didn't really explain this, but there is sort of a permanence goal over here as well. So my example with this is Marxism. Marxism is a results-based ethic. So the catchphrase for Marxism is from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. Which right there is that third bullet point, right? It's what is necessary, what is necessary for each person, right? But communism itself was supposed to be the system to end all systems, right? It's the final goal. It's the thing that once this is achieved, we have this permanent utopia. So it all ultimately ties together. So that's plenty for one video. It didn't really have much to do with the previous videos in this series. But you may have noticed that I did talk about two archetypes. So the natural question arises, does this possibly have something to do with the two Darwinian archetypes I talked about in the previous videos? Why, yes. So that'll be my topic for the next video. But in the meantime, if you liked this one, please give it the official recognition and let me know what you think about it in the comments. And I will continue this in the next one.